In the final decades of the 19th century, the United States was a nation straining under the weight of its own transformation. Industrial wealth rose faster than laws could restrain it. Cities expanded faster than institutions could humanize them, and political power increasingly concentrated in the hands of corporations, whose influence reached far beyond public scrutiny. Into this turbulent landscape stepped a figure who seemed, at first glance, profoundly unlikely to survive it, let alone reshape it. Theodore Roosevelt was born into privilege but physical weakness, into refinement but moral restlessness, into a world that expected him to observe history rather than seize it. His rise was neither inevitable nor smooth. It was forged deliberately, through discipline, loss, ambition, and a relentless belief that personal character and national destiny were inseparable. Theodore Roosevelt was born in 1858 in a brownstone on East 20th Street in New York City, a structure that reflected both comfort and constraint. The architecture of his childhood home symbolized the ordered world of upper-class Manhattan, solid, respectable, inward-looking. Inside, young Theodore struggled with severe asthma that often left him gasping for breath, confined to bed while other children ran freely outdoors. His father, Theodore Roosevelt Sr., a wealthy philanthropist and civic reformer, refused to accept fragility as fate. He famously told his son that he had the mind but not the body, and that it was Theodore's responsibility to build the rest. This idea, that weakness was not a sentence but a challenge, became the central axis of Roosevelt's life. Roosevelt responded with obsessive determination. He exercised relentlessly, boxed despite frequent injuries, and imposed upon himself a regimen of self-improvement that bordered on ascetic. This transformation was not merely physical, it was philosophical. Roosevelt absorbed the Victorian belief that moral strength, national vitality, and masculine virtue were intertwined. His private journals from adolescence reveal a young man consciously constructing himself, sentence by sentence, habit by habit, into someone worthy of action. Even as a child, he viewed life as a contest between vigor and decay. Educated at Harvard, Roosevelt entered a world of intellectual privilege at a time when America's elite were struggling to define their purpose in a rapidly democratizing society. He excelled academically, but remained dissatisfied with abstraction. History for Roosevelt was not a passive record of events. It was a guidebook for conduct. His early writing already reflected a belief that nations, like individuals, could rise or fall depending on their willingness to confront corruption, weakness, and complacency. When his father died suddenly in 1878, Roosevelt experienced a loss that would haunt him permanently. He later wrote that he never again felt fully safe in the world. This emotional rupture intensified his urgency, driving him toward public life with an almost reckless intensity. Roosevelt entered politics at an unusually young age, winning election to the New York State Assembly in 1881. Albany politics exposed him to the machinery of power at its most unromantic smoke-filled rooms, patronage networks, and open bribery. Rather than adapt quietly, Roosevelt attacked corruption publicly, earning enemies within his own party. His reputation as a reformer was cemented not by compromise, but by confrontation. He relished political combat, viewing it as a test of moral courage. In an era when political survival depended on loyalty to party bosses, Roosevelt's independence marked him as both dangerous and expendable. Personal tragedy soon reshaped his trajectory. In February 1884, within hours of each other, Roosevelt's wife Alice and his mother Martha died in the same house. The double loss shattered him. He withdrew, abruptly, from New York politics and retreated to the Badlands of the Dakota Territory, seeking solace in a landscape that was vast, unforgiving, and indifferent to grief. There, Roosevelt attempted to reinvent himself once again, this time as a rancher. The frontier offered him a different architecture of meaning: open plains instead of enclosed rooms, raw timber cabins instead of polished parlors. It was a space where effort translated directly into survival. The Badlands experience deepened Roosevelt's understanding of America beyond the Eastern elite. He lived alongside cowboys, immigrants, and laborers, witnessing both the dignity and brutality of frontier life. Though financially unsuccessful, harsh winters wiped out much of his cattle. Roosevelt emerged with a hardened sense of realism. He returned east, not as a romantic frontiersman, but as a man convinced that national strength depended on discipline, fairness, and an active government capable of restraining excess. Though financially unsuccessful, harsh winters wiped out much of his cattle. Roosevelt emerged with a hardened sense of realism. He returned east, not as a romantic frontiersman, but as a man convinced that national strength depended on discipline, fairness, and an active government capable of restraining excess. Roosevelt's return to public life coincided with a growing reform movement within the Republican Party. He was appointed to the U.S. Civil Service Commission, where he pursued merit-based appointments with evangelical zeal, enforcing laws that many expected to remain symbolic. Later, as president of the New York City Police Board, he became famous for conducting midnight inspections, personally observing patrolmen, and enforcing standards that blurred the line between leadership and performance. Architecture again served as symbolism. Roosevelt moved through police stations, city streets, and tenement neighborhoods, physically inserting himself into the structures of governance. By the late 1890s, Roosevelt's reputation had expanded beyond reform circles. His writing on naval power attracted national attention, particularly his belief that sea strength was essential to American influence. As Assistant Secretary of the Navy, he pushed aggressively for modernization, anticipating conflict with Spain, even before war was declared. When the Spanish-American War broke out in 1898, Roosevelt resigned his post to fight. This decision, theatrical and risky, transformed him into a national figure. The Rough Riders, the volunteer cavalry regiment Roosevelt helped organize, embodied his philosophy of unity across class lines. Ivy League athletes rode alongside Western ranch hands, all wearing the same dust-stained uniforms. Roosevelt's charge up San Juan Hill, though later mythologized, was undeniably courageous. He exposed himself to enemy fire repeatedly, leading from the front rather than commanding from safety. Newspapers seized upon the image. Roosevelt returned from Cuba not just as a war hero, but as a symbol of renewed American confidence.